All right, so here we are. Come into your comfortable seat. And remember, you can always put a ball between your back and the chair if that helps you to lift the chest a little bit. Okay, that support can be really helpful so that we don't slump forward. Here's your pollen, Nadine, right in my throat. Okay, so find that hot air balloon lifting you. I think it's more dust from me sanding my deck this week. I've been wearing a face mask, but there's still just dust everywhere. But it's almost done. I think I'm going to finish staining it today, and then it'll just need its second coat. And yahoo! Then we can use the deck. All right, hot air balloon lifting you from the palate. Now feel the back of your skull, the base of your skull. There's kind of that hollow at the center of the base of your skull. And I want you to imagine that there's a gentle hook there too. So this, when we interlace our fingers and bring our thumbs to the base of our skull and lift, I want you to imagine today that there is a hook at the base of your skull lifting and lengthening you, and that you can kind of rest back into it. So what this does is this helps us to release the hyoid bone back and up, kind of in an angle back. And so this is a gentle nod. In Pilates, we say, nod your nose towards your mouth. I know that's not really possible, but we used to say, nod your chin towards your sternum, and people did this. And they just flatten the back of their neck. So the nod of nose towards mouth is just a little more subtle, but feel when you nod your nose towards your mouth, you lift that center place at the back of your skull. So imagine there's a hook there that could very gently lift you, and it's stretching you skyward. And it's assisting the hot air balloon. So you have two hooks on your head now. Rest back and tune into your breath. Invite the breath deep into your pelvis. Make sure that your seat is comfortable, that your sit bones are wide. And if they're not, remember you can pick one up and move it out back behind you. But you want a width to your pelvic floor. And then feel that your pubic bone and tailbone are pretty well aligned. One isn't a lot farther towards the floor than the other. And breathe deep down into the pelvis. Now, Katie, imagine that you're filling the pelvis with breath, and then it begins to fill the waistline. Feel for an expansion at your side bodies, at your side waists. Really just breathe into the pelvis, and just like maybe 2 inches of the waistline, try to feel an expansion just above the pelvis, into the back body, into the side bodies, into the front body. The more we feel and know an area of the body, the easier it will be to work with it. So try to feel the expansion of that low waistline just 2 inches above the pelvis. And as you concentrate, make sure that your chin doesn't start jutting forward, your head sloping forward, but that hook at the base of your skull is still lifting you. The hot air balloon is still lifting you, and breathe into the waistline. Now let the breath lap all the way up to your lowest ribs. Feel an expansion outward and upward of the waist. Just to the lowest ribs, and then let the breath go. Feel the sensations of the fascia stretching on your inhale, relaxing on your exhale. And how as the skin moves, as the fascia of your torso moves with the breath, there's a ripple effect. You may feel movement through other tissues in the body. Remember that this fascia surrounds every organ, every bone, every muscle. Some people refer to it as a fishnet, some as a spider web. What we do know is they say if they took the fascial network out of your body and there were no bones in it, it would still stand. It would be a kind of more collapsed U, a bouncier U. So the bones are in there as spacers to spread out this fascial network. Let the breath spread it as well. Breathing in, just fill yourself up to the lowest circle of ribs. Now imagine that that lowest circle of ribs is one of those life rings lifeguards throw out at the ocean. Your low ribs are the life ring, floating on top of the ocean of breath that fills you from pelvic floor to this lowest circle of ribs. And let the lowest circle of ribs float up away from the pelvis, lifting on the wave of breath. And then exhale, relax. That low rib ring will float back down towards your pelvis a little bit. And then inhale, and on that rising wave, feel that life ring of the lowest ribs lift away from the pelvis. Now see, can you sustain that lift? Can you keep the low ribs lifted? Don't do this at 110% of effort. Just a little stretch of the low ribs away from the pelvis. Maybe at like 50% of effort. And continue to feel for the breath in the waistline. For me, if I lift the ribs a little bit and continue to feel for the breath, I feel it more because I've kind of stretched that tissue. Feel for the breath along the low back, the low spine. And now let the breath rise through the rib cage to the tops of the collarbones and shoulder blades. Feel the expansion as the breath rises. And then exhale and soften. Remember to let go your inhale before you're straining. Let your face and jaw relax. Check back in with that hook at the base of the skull lifting you. The low rib ring lifting. The torso filling three-dimensionally. Let go the exhale before the inhale strains. But still invite a three-dimensional breath. And for a moment, concentrate on one diagonal. Let's say your left sort of front side body and your right back side body. Inhale and spread them apart from each other. So you're opening one diagonal across the torso as you inhale and releasing it as you exhale. Now focus on the opposite diagonal. Left front, right back. Note if one diagonal is harder to stretch. It is true for me with my scoliosis that I can really feel one direction and not the other so much. So then I bring in my imagination and I imagine I feel it. I know what it feels like on the other side. I stretch the diagonal away from each other, two side bodies. Now come back to your three-dimensional breath. Come back to letting the lowest ribs ride up on the inhale. The base of the skull ride up on the inhale. Keep those as you exhale. And see if the low ribs in the skull can rise a little more on the next inhale. Keep them lifted on the exhale. See if the low ribs in the skull can rise a little more on the next inhale. And keep going with this. Gently stretching the low back and the neck and the thoracic spine. Relaxing on the exhales, the spine gets longer. You may feel stabilizers along the spine activate because they're trying to hold you firm as you lengthen the spine. One more. Now keep the spine long and imagine breathing space between the vertebrae. Imagine a forest and how you can see light through the branches. And then think how the spine has these little arms that come out to the sides and to the back. Breathe space between those little arms of the vertebrae. And exhale, as you relax the outer body, lengthen the spine up. Breathe space between the little arms of the vertebrae. Exhale, lengthen the spine up. Fluid breath. Okay, let's take that into a standing practice. So as you come to standing, place your hands at your lowest ribs. Look down at your feet. Ground the four corners and lift the arches. Know that there are several diaphragms in the body, and the arches of the feet are considered one of them. And then there's your pelvic floor diaphragm. We know how to lift that now. Try to lift the front triangle of the pelvic floor. And then with your hands at the lowest rib ring, lift the rib ring. Lift it up. Use your hands. Lift. Both the front, the sides, and the back. So let your thumbs really come into the back and lift the low rib ring. Now maintain that and release your arms. Some of us will have the tendency to want to really lift the front ribs, which shortens the back. Really think of lifting the low back ribs. And still let your head rest back and let that hook lift the base of the skull. Find your shoulder blades on your back ribs. A little lift at the center sternum and inner collarbones. Then bring your hands, thumbs under the chin, fingers under the base of the skull. And be careful with this if you have cervical spine issues, but very gently lift the head. Think of lengthening the neck. Think of lengthening the spine of the rib cage. And now let the hot air balloon and the hook at the base of the back of the skull take over and release your hand. Breathe sky between the vertebrae. Feel that low rib ring lifting. Draw up the front of the pelvic floor. Draw the navel in and up. Feel how that can strengthen along the front of the spine. And just lean a little forward, taking one foot back. The geese family is in my yard. The mom and the dad and 3 babies that now look like geese. So as you lean a little forward, feel for stabilizing muscles in the back. See if you can feel for them. Notice, yes, something is stabilizing my back. and then step that back foot in. We're not coming into a back bend. We're just taking the foot back and hinging the spine a little forward. You can even bring your hands back to the spine, back to the sacrum. And you may feel between the sacrum and the spine, there's some muscle tissue activating to stabilize your connection spine to pelvis. And then as you feel up the spine, you'll feel the outer muscles, the erector spinae, but the multifidi are under there. And release. Lift up your long TheraBand and bring it up over the top of the head. Remember to bring it back far enough that when you press up, you're pressing up from behind the ears. That press up from behind the ears helps you lift that center in the base of the skull. It'll lead to a nod of nose towards mouth. Tailbone grounds you. Front of the pelvic floor lifts, navel in and up. Shoulder blades on the back body. Really ground the four corners of the feet. Lift your arches. Lift the front of the pelvic floor. Lift the navel in and up. Lift the low rib ring even in the back. Now notice, are you over efforting to the point where you're throwing your knees back, you're tightening your butt? Try to find the extension, this lift, this energy without overdoing it. Press up into the TheraBand. Ground the feet, press up into the TheraBand. Lift that low rib ring. And take one foot slightly back. Now again, we're not back bending. So really use Uddiyana Bandha, that navel in and up towards the spine, and see if you can lean slightly forward. Maybe the toe will come off the floor, maybe not. Feel into your back body, the strength of your back body, the shoulder blades on the back, and come back up. And then take the other foot back. Front of the pelvic floor lifts, navel in and up, low rib ring lifts. Come forward just a little bit, perhaps the foot comes off. And come back to standing. Pause here, still lengthening up into your TheraBand. Ground into the right foot and lift to the left toe. And lower. Keep the heart lifted, the gaze at the horizon, lift to the right toe. And lower. Can you keep that low rib ring floating? Now we don't want to stiffen the spine, and if we lift too hard that low rib ring, then we're going to tense along the vertebrae. We don't want to do that. We want that lowest rib ring to float up, to be able to move, but to be floating with our movement. But still, we can think of length and space. Still, we can press the head up into the TheraBand and think of a lift of the skull. And we can lift the knee and lift the knee. And we can lean back into the back body. Navel in and up, and just enjoy noticing how we can support a long spine. And release. Bring the TheraBand to the lowest back ribs around your back body. Hands forward, palms up, hands a little wider than the elbows. Let the heart rest back. And inhale to one toe. And exhale. As you inhale, take the hands forward. Breathe into that low back rib ring. So we inhale and exhale. Inhale and exhale. Now think of lifting the TheraBand, lifting that low rib ring up a little as you inhale back into it. It doesn't happen much, but I just want you to kind of become aware of this idea that we don't flare the front ribs and drop the back ribs down. We're going to lift. We're going to keep some length in that back waistline. Inhale and exhale. Inhale and exhale. Perhaps the knee lifts higher. Keep the heart lifted and the inner collarbones lifted, and you don't have to come this far. Inhale and exhale and inhale and exhale and inhale and exhale. Release your TheraBand, bring it out in front of you. Bring the right hand to the hip, left palm open. Ground the feet. Open the left arm. Find both shoulder blades on the back body. From your hip pockets, ground down into the heels and lift your low back rib ring, and then lift your shoulder blades on the back, and then lift that center base of the skull. And pause there with big awareness in the back body. Feel into the four corners of the feet, the lifting arches, the lift of the front triangle of the pelvic floor, navel in and up. And release the left arm forward and open it again. The rest of the body sturdy and stable. Can you stay aware in the low back rib ring, keeping it lifted, breathing it back, and release. Switch sides. Really find the left shoulder on your back before you take the right arm open. Ground the feet. Open the arm. Find both shoulder blades on the back. From your hip pockets, ground into your heels. From your low ribs, lift. Lift the low back ribs. Lift the shoulder blades and broaden them. Feel into your own strength. Make sure you're not hyperextending your knees in effort. Heart is lifted, inner collarbones lifted. We're strengthening the back of the body, which will tighten it up and shorten those muscles so that these are long muscles like this. They're all long and kind of weak in the back. Right now, you're strengthening them. You'll strengthen them more if you don't throw the front ribs forward, if you don't throw the pelvis forward, if you really use the muscles of the back to open the front chest. Now release the right arm forward and then open it again. Release it forward and open it. Stay aware of your rib ring. Stay aware of your grounding pelvis and legs. The back center of the skull lifting. And release. Put the TheraBand down and pick up your hand weights. Look down at your feet. Parallel at the second metatarsals unless you know otherwise. Get used to finding alignment. Float your arms up. From underneath, like there's a wave washing up your side bodies, lift the low rib ring. Lift the outer shoulder blades. Lift up into the armpits. Feel the arches of your feet lift. The front of the pelvic floor lift. The navel in and up. Breathe still into the lowest third of your back, the middle third of your back, and the upper third of your back. When you fill the middle and upper thirds, you can also fill the whole umbrella of the rib cage. And release. And roll your shoulders. And now, keeping awareness in that back body, float one arm forward and down, the next arm forward and down. Notice if you do this with the pelvis, or if you do this with your front ribs. Try to do it from the arms, with a stable pelvis, with your low back rib ring resting back, and a long waistline. Head resting back, hook gently lifting the base of the skull. Now lift both arms forward. Lift the low back rib ring up. Now, can you sustain that lift of the low back rib ring and open the right arm out to the right? And come back to center. Sorry, Izzy's barking at something. Open the left arm out to the left and come back. Back and forth. Stay aware of your low rib ring and your pelvis, helping you ground as you move these arms. And strengthen them. Fluid breath. Come back to center after you've evened your sides and release your arms. Roll your shoulders. Sorry about that. And bring your arms up into a goalpost position. Tailbone grounding. Let your back body lean back. Lift the low back ribs away from the grounding pelvis and legs and reach the arms skyward. And release them down. Can you keep that whole lifeguard ring of the lower ribs lifting? The navel in and up may help you to lift the back ribs. Make sure you're not tucking your tail or hugging your sit bones together too much. Really ground into the four corners of each foot. Lift the arches. Press up from those lifted arches. Keeping that low rib ring lifted, open your elbows back into goalposts and bring the pinkies towards each other. And open. Can you sustain that long waistline as you work the arms? Drawing the navel in and up, lifting the front of the pelvic floor. Letting the arms come together and open. Exhale and inhale. Feel into your own created stability and space. And then next time you open the arms, face the palms towards you and bicep curl. And then open and bicep curl and open. Inhaling and exhaling. Inhaling and exhaling, lifting that low rib ring. You can stay with just the arms, or if you'd like to add the legs, come to one toe and release, and the other toe and release. Make sure you can still be aware of your rib ring when you add movement. It doesn't stay stagnant, it moves with the moving legs, but it's still lifting. And then perhaps you lift the knee. None of the leg movement required, but you can start experimenting with it. Can you keep the rib ring lifting and the heart lifting? That's hard. And then pause, bring your arms towards one another, release and roll your shoulders. Woohoo! Okay, pause here for a moment. Let your head rest back and the base of the center of the skull to lift. Come back to your three-dimensional breath, breathing deep into the pelvis, the waistline, the rib cage. Okay, let's come to sitting on the chair. I really like this assignment, Katie, because I think this is really important work for people to kind of become aware of this part of the spine, since it's the part that oftentimes gets injured in people. Okay, so sit forward on your chair enough that you'll be able to lean back. You don't need your hand weights. That would be adding a lot. Maybe we will right at the end. Make sure your sit bones are comfortably under you. Pubic bone and tailbone even. Lengthen your spine skyward and let your arms float up and then rest in water. Feel into the natural curves of your spine. Let the head rest back. Take a deep inhale, long spine, exhale, lean back. Feel this front square activate, but it doesn't squash you together and curl you forward. It just activates so that you can keep long and strong from your sit bones. Lift that low rib ring away. Feel how that activates your abdominal core and float one arm skyward and lower it down and the other arm skyward. Can you keep lifting that low rib ring as you inhale an arm up and exhale? Inhale and exhale. Now lift one foot and release. The other foot and release. Navel's in and up as you work. And then inhale, stretch skyward, and exhale, release your arms. Let the arms float forward. Relax them into the water. Inhale, long spine, spacious spine. Lift the rib ring and lean back. And now lift one arm and the opposite foot and down. The other arm and the opposite foot. We inhale and exhale and inhale and exhale. Fluid breath, fluid motion. Long spine lifted from the back center of the skull. Now inhale, reach skyward. Exhale, release your wings. Again, float the arms up and let them rest in water. So the resting in water means your elbow may be a little lower than your shoulder and that you're letting the shoulder girdle relax away from the lift of the head. So remember, when you lifted your head, let the shoulder girdle release away from that lift and then lean back. And really lift that low rib ring. Activate your bandhas and take one arm out to the side. Now really stay aware of lifting that opposite side rib ring so you don't collapse over and come back. The arm doesn't have to throw itself way back behind you. It can just open a little ways so that you can feel, okay, I'm creating asymmetry here. I need to stabilize for that asymmetry. So slow it down. Feel for grounding your sit bones, lengthening the spine, and keeping that low rib ring lifted away from the pelvis. Even in the back body, navel in and up will help. Isn't it cool? And then inhale, lift your arms. Exhale, release your wings and pause in an upright seat. Come back to your three-dimensional breath. So this is a lot of internal core work we've been doing today. So let yourself rest for a second. Rest into that idea of the base or the center palate and the base of the skull being lifted. Now imagine there's a flashlight on the top of your head and you're going to draw a circle on the sky. And even as the spine kind of undulates, it's designed to move. We want fluidity in the spine. Even there, feel how you stabilize with an awareness of this low rib ring. Like you could just let it go and then you're going to be side bending and you're going to have a sloppy circle. I want a little small circle up in the sky where you're still aware of these low ribs and you're lifting them away from the pelvis. Shoulder girdles relaxing away from the skull, but the spine is long and strong. Now take your circle the other way. Fluid breath. Long spine. Good. And then come back to center. Make sure your buttocks is fully on your chair. Heels under knees. Let your hands come forward. Now, make sure your knees don't collapse together. They stay lined up over these second metatarsal bones. As you come forward, come weight onto your feet. Lifted arches. Lifted front of the pelvic floor. Navel in and up. Bring your hands to your heart. Can you lift your low rib ring away from your pelvis? Can you lift your skull away from your shoulder girdle? Release your hands. Lift skyward. Come to standing. Lift the low rib ring away from the pelvis. Exhale. Hands to the heart. Can you lift the low rib ring away from the pelvis? Really ground the feet. Lift the arches. And bend the knees. Hinging forward into your Utkatasana, fierce pose in yoga. Pause. Four corners of the feet grounded. Arches lifted. Navel in and up. Pelvic floor lifts. Can you lift your low rib ring away from the pelvis? Let the pelvis be heavy. Lift the skull away from the shoulder girdle. And sit yourself back down. And release. And pause with your breath. Fluid breath. Really nice work, everyone. Let's come to the floor. Have your ball and your long TheraBand, please, and a pillow if you need one. My ball's getting away from me. And let yourself rest back. So now we've been practicing resting the head back. Here on the floor, you get to really feel into that, resting the head back. We want the hairline even with the chin, so some of you may want a firm pillow. Make sure that pillow isn't lifting you so high that it's actually adding to your kyphosis. It's curling you forward. We want to rest the shoulders broad. Keep your natural lumbar curve. And let's do a little somatic walking. Taking your right knee forward as you press into the right foot and lift the right hip. Press into the left foot. Take the left knee forward, lift the left hip. And back and forth and back and forth gently. Feel how the spine rotates. Now put your thumbs on your lowest ribs and your fingers on your hip pointers. And feel how the lowest ribs twist towards the lifting hip. So you have kind of opposite rotation in the pelvis and this rib cage. Feel that. That motion helps us in our walking because it helps spring us forward. The twist and twist and twist. We want them to be natural and fluid. A lot of back pain comes when somebody gets rigid in some area of the spine. So we invite fluidity here, just a gentle rocking. The pelvis rocking one way, the low ribs rocking the other. Place one set of fingers on your navel, the other on your sternum. Notice that the navel rocks towards the lowering hip, away from the lifting hip. Notice that the sternum rocks towards the lifting pelvis. Feel into the motion, invite it to be smooth and fluid. This is key to keeping comfort along the spine. Fluid breath. And then come back to neutral, a neutral lumbar curve. Let your arms relax. The head of the arm bone resting back and float one leg to tabletop. Float it back down, landing light as a feather. Other leg to tabletop, floating it down light as a feather. Float and release. Float and release. And float the one leg up and pause. And float the other leg up and pause. Now feel. If you feel like your lumbar spine is getting forced into the floor in an uncomfortable way, bring a firm blanket under your sacrum. Okay. Now take the left leg out to the left. Try to firm back with the navel. Draw the left leg in, take the right leg out. Shoulders broad, head relaxed back. Nod the nose towards the mouth. Feel into stabilizing side to side. Think about, what does the navel want to do? The navel wants to follow the opening leg. What does the sternum want to do? Does it lean away from the navel to help support and stabilize the spine? Using the shoulder girdle. Draw both knees into the chest, circle them wide apart and back together again. Let yourself rest from all that thinking. Circle the other way. And then draw your right knee in and lengthen the left leg out, either towards the sky or at your 45-degree angle. Nod nose towards mouth. We're practicing lengthening the back of the neck. And either almost lift the hair from the hairline or lift and look towards your inner thighs and switch and switch. The gaze may not be totally at the inner thigh, might be more at the knee. Or reach the lengthening leg. Reach it out. Long, fluid stretch. And then draw both knees in. Lift hands and feet for the sky. Ground the navel back towards the spine, but don't flatten the spine. Now take Wrists away from ankles, ankles away from wrists. Draw the low rib ring away from the pelvis. Circle the arms and hug the knees in. Reaching out, ground that low back rib ring and hug in. Inhaling out, exhale in. Think of having a long waistline here, but supporting it with that front navel coming back in and up along the spine. Inhaling, open, and exhaling, hug. Inhale, stretch, and exhale, hug. One more. Lengthen and hug. And now take your knees and circle them together around the perimeter of your sacrum. This is one of the best ways to get to know your sacrum. Feel the perimeter of the sacrum. Take the knees the other way. And sometimes you might feel one side is more tender than the other. What you're feeling is your SI joint between your sacrum and your ilium bones. And come back to center and lift your legs up, knees bent, and either toe dip one foot towards the floor and exhale it back up, and then the other. Or toe dip, grounding your rib ring, both feet towards the floor, and exhale back up. Don't let the shoulders curl up to support the lowering and lifting of the legs. Try to ground the shoulders back. Ground that low back rib ring back. Inhaling down and exhaling up. Base of the skull reaches away from the back of the neck, the low back of the neck. Nose nods towards mouth. Then we're not jutting the chin skyward and shortening the neck. And one more. And then open your legs into a scissor and pulse. Pulse and switch, pulse, pulse and switch. Now right here, people may really shorten the spine and hitch up the hip of the leg that's forward. Remember, you can bend the knee instead. Think of keeping both side waists long. So the motion may be smaller. If we try to come into too big of a motion, we have to throw the pelvis out of alignment to do that. So pick a motion that you can keep your pelvis relatively balanced as the legs pulse, pulse, and switch. Pulse, pulse, and switch. And now bring the feet together and bend the knees and float the hands behind the head. And exhale, lift the right elbow, lengthen the right leg. Long from low ribs on the left side through the foot. And switch. Lift the opposite side. Long side body. And switch, and switch, and switch. Rest the head back. Traction from that center base of the skull, keeping the neck long. Rest the eyes and the jaw and work from your square, taking one side ribs across to the opposite hip pointer. Strengthening your obliques now. Don't flop across the body. Lift the elbows skyward. Make it more of a workout. Flapping means you're just using momentum. Reach the elbow, reach the elbow, reach the elbow, and come back to center. Release the head. Float one foot to the floor and then the other. And pause with your three-dimensional breath. Relax on the exhales. So sometimes we have the bandhas engaged and we breathe around them. Sometimes we relax and we just fill three-dimensionally because that three-dimensional filling also supports the spine. Now, on your next exhale, blow out through pursed lips. Lift the front triangle of the pelvic floor, draw the navel in and up. Try to do this without collapsing the low spine. So exhale through pursed lips, lift the front triangle of the pelvic floor, navel in and up, spine stays in its natural curve. Soften and inhale. Exhale, lift the front of the pelvic floor, navel in and up. Soften and inhale. Keep going with this, feeling the sensations of the bandhas activating, but not overdoing it to the point where you flatten your lumbar curve. This is deep internal work. It is work. You should feel the front abdominal muscles, the pelvic floor, transverse abdominis, all activating. And then release that. Press the pillow out and lift your pelvis skyward into a bridge. Now reach the tailbone long towards the backs of the knees. Reach the pelvis long away from the rib cage. You may actually feel a stretch in your psoas doing that. I do. So you press into the feet, you reach the pelvis towards the knees, away from the rib cage. And then lift the right hip slightly higher, stretch the right side, lift the left hip slightly higher, stretch the left side. Back and forth, aware of your long waistline. And then come to center. Inhale, lift the pelvis. Exhale, float it towards the floor, almost touch, and then inhale. Let it ride the wind up. And exhale, float back down. When the pelvis is lifting, fill the whole waistline with breath. When the pelvis is descending, relax navel towards spine. Inhale and exhale at your own pace. Feel how you're strengthening your hamstrings, your glutes, and your low back. And lift one more time. And then exhale, either lower your pelvis slowly or release one vertebrae at a time. You may feel like parts of your spine move in chunks. We want to start having each vertebrae release separately. Come into your natural lumbar curve. And if you're rolling, lift the tailbone. Peel the sacrum off the mat. Peel one bead of the spine at a time off the mat. Back up. Pause. Stretch your pelvis away from your rib cage. And then exhale, lower the pelvis and turn yourselves over onto hands and knees. So we're living up to our Mindful Pilates title today. So we're practicing Mindful Pilates. Come on to your hands and knees. Look at your fingers and spread them evenly apart from one another. And then claw the mat a little, lifting your middle knuckles. This will help you lift the center of your palm, which is the arch of your palm. Think of lifting the center of the wrist up towards your armpit, which will protect the carpal tunnel. And inhale, cow. And exhale, cat. And inhale, cow. Notice how the front ribs are far away from the front hip pointers, but the back ribs are close to the back pelvis. And then take the opposite and notice how the back of the rib cage is away from the sacrum. So we inhale and exhale, just gaining awareness in the spine. Now come to your neutral. Let your shoulder girdle release towards over your fingers. Don't actually let it do that, but kind of have that momentum. And then let your pelvis release towards your feet. Shoulders towards fingers, pelvis towards feet. Shoulders towards fingers, pelvis towards feet. Let the spine lengthen. Ribs away from pelvis. And then pause. Lift the front of your pelvic floor, navel in and up. And imagine the glass of flowers on your sacrum. Lift your right leg out to the right. You can stay there or take your left fingers out to the left shoulder blade onto the back. Can you still think of keeping your waistline long here? And exhale. Lift your left leg like a dog at the fire hydrant. Remember your glass of flowers on the sacrum. Perhaps the right fingertips come out and the right shoulder blade lifts. Long spine. Base of the skull reaching away from the shoulder girdle. And release. Roll back into your child's pose. Deep breaths into the back body. Maybe you can walk your fingers forward or even just knead the ground like a cat does, thinking of creating more space in the spine. Walk off to one side if that's accessible to you and stretch the opposite side, breathing deep into the stretching side body. Feel how one side of the ribs is closer to the pelvis and the other farther. Just starting to notice your waistline. Come back to center and walk the other way. Notice the waistline. Notice how that fascia of the waistline is interrelated with the fascia of the rib cage, the shoulder, the arm. And come back to center. Ground your hands at least shoulder distance apart. Claw your fingers into the mat and roll up into your downward dog. It can be a bent knee downward dog. Remember, the most important thing is that long spine. Now really take your pelvis away from the low rib ring and slowly perhaps take your femur bones back. Make sure in doing this you don't cat curl the spine. Long spine, pelvis away from the lowest ribs is most important. Knees can be bent. Just really honor the natural curves of your spine. And then step the feet towards the hands. Bend the knees and unhinge. Back to standing. Pause in your mountain pose. Fluid breath. Place your hands at your lowest ribs. Lift your low rib ring away from your pelvis. Ground from your pelvis down into your feet. Imagine the hot air balloon stretching you from the center palate and the back of the center skull. Release the hands, keeping the lifted rib ring. Open the palms up, bring them into a T, and lift the heart. Keep that low back rib ring and those side ribs lifted. So don't collapse and throw the ribs forward after all that good work. Lift the low back rib ring, lift the low back rib ring, and still can you open the heart slightly? Tailbone grounds. Fluid breath. And release your arms to your sides, click your heels together, and bend your knees, sliding the back down the wall, and zip it up. And bend, and zip. Can you move from here? So we bend, and zip, bend, and zip. Lift the low rib ring. Lift the low rib ring even as the pelvis releases as the knees bend, and then lift. Stretch the pelvis away from the low rib ring and lift. Bend the knees, lift to the balls of the feet, zip it up and lower the heels and bend. Lift, zip and lower and bend. Lift, zip and lower. Now lift. Find that lowest rib ring. Lift it away from the pelvis. Bend the knees. Lower the heels and zip. We float. Bend. Lower and zip and float. Bend. Lower and zip and float. Bend. Lower and zip. Really become long in your waistline. Now imagine buoys under your armpits, lengthening your rib cage. Broad across the shoulder girdle. Let there be a lift at the base of the skull. Rest it all back. Broad across the collarbones. Breathe three-dimensionally into the body. Invite the breath deep into the low back. Soften. And inhale. Let's draw in continued mindful awareness of different parts of our inner landscape. Let's inhale in to creating space and strength along the spine. And let's inhale into this, aiding our ease of movement as we go about our days. I wish you all a wonderful Wednesday. Okay, I'm curious how that was for you.